person was carrying a child.
And you say a person, male or female?
A male.
So I went into our bedroom and she wasn't there, and that was the first time really that the panic hit. And I just ran back into her bedroom, and literally at that point, the curtains, which were closed, just kind of flew open.
It was a fleeting image, no more than a shadow, crossing a narrow Portuguese street on a warm spring evening. A man, darkly dressed, striding quickly with a small child in his arms. The child's bare feet dangled lifelessly, her pale pajamas glowing faintly under the dim light. To most, it might have seemed ordinary, a father carrying his sleepy daughter back to bed. But to Jane Tanner, that glimpse would become the most controversial testimony in one of the world's most infamous mysteries, the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann. On May 3, 2007, the McCanns, a British family vacationing in Praia da Luz, Portugal, experienced a tragedy that would reverberate across the globe. Madeleine was gone from her bed in apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort. No forced entry, no ransom note, no definitive trace. What remained was panic, confusion, and a timeline that investigators would dissect for years. And standing at the heart of that fragile timeline was Jane Tanner, an ordinary holidaymaker, a friend dining with the McCanns who became the only person to describe an abduction in progress. Her words painted a picture so vivid that they filled the void left by absent evidence. Without Tanner, the story might have lingered as a tragic mystery, uncertain in shape and direction. With her, the disappearance transformed into a narrative of kidnapping, carried on headlines, amplified in press conferences, etched into the public imagination. But questions lingered from the very start. Why did no one else see the man she described, even though others were on the same street at the same time? Why did she not raise the alarm immediately, waiting instead until after the chaos had erupted? And why did her account seem to evolve, gaining details as days passed? These questions remain as haunting as the night itself. Jane Tanner's sighting was either a fleeting moment of truth that defined history, or a fragile illusion that misled the world. Tonight, we step into that night in Praia da Luz, retracing the steps, the words, and the contradictions that continue to shadow the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. To understand the power of Jane Tanner's testimony, we need to return to that night in May 2007, to the quiet seaside resort of Praia da Luz, where a group of British friends known as the Tapas 7 gathered for what should have been an ordinary holiday dinner. The McCanns, Kate and Jerry, both doctors from England, had brought their 3 children on this trip, hoping for sun, rest, and time among familiar companions. Apartment 5A, their temporary home, sat on the ground floor just a short walk from the swimming pool and the small tapas bar restaurant where the adults planned their evenings together. It was a routine that blended comfort with risk. Each couple put their children to bed in the nearby apartments, then dined as a group, leaving the doors unlocked for easy access. To ease their consciences, they devised a rotation system. Every 20 to 30 minutes, one parent would leave the table, slip back to the apartment, and quietly check on the sleeping children. It was this system, meant to provide reassurance, that would later come under harsh scrutiny. At around 7 p.m., the McCanns tucked their 3 children into bed. Madeleine, just 3 years old, wore her familiar light-colored pajamas, the same ones later referenced in Tanner's account. By 8:30 p.m., the adults gathered at the Tapas Bar, a small restaurant within the resort complex, but with no direct line of sight to the apartments. The path back wound through gardens and narrow streets, enough distance for uncertainty, enough cover for mystery. At 9:05, Jerry McCann rose from the table to check on his children. He found all 3 asleep, though he later recalled that the bedroom door seemed slightly ajar. Thinking little of it, he adjusted the door, used the bathroom, and stepped back outside. On his return, he encountered another guest, Jeremy Wilkins, walking his infant. The 2 men lingered on the street, chatting casually for several minutes, just meters from the McCann's apartment. Their conversation was unremarkable, but its timing would prove crucial. Because while Jerry and Wilkins stood there, Jane Tanner left the tapas bar for her own turn to check on her children. It was around 9:15, and as she walked up the street, she glanced across to see a figure moving quickly, carrying a small barefoot child in light pajamas. She would later insist this could have been Madeleine. Yet neither Jerry nor Wilkins, standing just steps away, saw anything unusual. This contradiction, The clash between one woman's solitary vision and two men's silence would ignite years of debate. It was the spark that turned dinner into disaster, and a missing child into one of the most scrutinized mysteries of the modern age. Jane Tanner was not a detective, nor did she carry any special authority that night. She was a mother on holiday, part of the same circle of friends who trusted in a fragile system of checks and balances to watch over their children. Yet, by the end of the evening, her words would rise above every other statement, becoming the cornerstone of the abduction theory that shaped global headlines. According to her official account, at approximately 9:15 p.m., as she left the tapas bar to check on her two young daughters, she walked along the narrow street adjacent to the McCann's apartment. There, in the fading light, she said she saw a man striding across the road. He was of medium build, dressed in dark clothing, and in his arms he carried a small child, barefoot and dressed in pale-colored pajamas. The child's body, she recalled, seemed limp, her limbs hanging loosely as though she were asleep. It was only a glimpse, seconds at most, but one that etched itself into Tanner's memory. What made this testimony so powerful was not its clarity, but its timing. Jerry McCann had just checked the children at 9:05 and claimed all were safe. Kate McCann would return at 10 to discover Madeleine gone. Tanner's sighting bridged the gap between those two certainties, providing investigators and the public with a narrative thread. Madeleine alive at 9:05, carried away by 9:15, missing by 10. In a case with almost no physical evidence, no forced shutters, no broken locks, no ransom note, this timeline became invaluable. Tanner's words gave substance to Kate McCann's anguished cry. "They've taken her." Without Tanner, that cry might have been dismissed as panic. With Tanner, it had a visual companion, an image of a child being stolen into the night. For investigators starved of clues, for journalists eager to frame a story, her statement was irresistible. And yet, there was a fragility to it. She was the only person who claimed to have seen this supposed abductor. No resort staff, no passing neighbors, and not even Jerry or Jeremy Wilkins, who were standing mere meters away, reported seeing such a figure. That exclusivity elevated her account, but also exposed it to doubt. Was she the one witness who glimpsed the truth, or had she misinterpreted something ordinary, a father carrying his child back from dinner? Nevertheless, her testimony defined the investigation's direction. The narrative of abduction did not emerge from physical traces or forensic science. It emerged from Jane Tanner's brief and solitary observation. For years to come, those few seconds on a Portuguese street would be repeated in newspapers, police briefings, and documentaries as if they were fact, even as their reliability remained uncertain. From the beginning, doubts surrounded Jane Tanner's sighting. The most glaring contradiction lay in the presence of two other men, Jerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins, just meters away from the spot she described. Jerry had left apartment 5A at roughly 9:10, encountered Wilkins on the street, and the two remained there for several minutes. Their line of sight should have overlapped with Tanner's, yet neither of them recalled seeing a man carrying a child. For investigators, this was not a minor discrepancy. It cut straight to the credibility of her words. Equally troubling was Tanner's behavior that evening. If she had seen something unusual, why did she not raise the alarm immediately? She returned to the tapas bar, checked on her own children, and said nothing. It was only after 10 p.m., when Kate McCann rushed back in panic, declaring Madeleine was gone, that Tanner revealed her sighting. This delay cast a long shadow over her testimony, suggesting it might have been shaped by hindsight rather than pure observation. Her description also shifted over time. In her first statement, she offered only vague details. A man in dark clothes carrying a child in pale pajamas. As days passed, her account grew more elaborate. She spoke of the way the child's limbs hung limply, the cut of the pajamas, even suggesting they resembled those Madeleine had been wearing. To skeptics, this evolution looked less like a memory sharpening and more like a narrative aligning with facts already known. Eyewitness memory is notoriously fragile, and Tanner's account bore all the hallmarks of its limits. The sighting was fleeting, dimly lit, and filtered through the casual mindset of a holiday evening. It would not have been unusual to see a parent carrying a sleepy toddler through the resort's paths. Why then did her observation take on such monumental weight? Because there was no other evidence. With no fingerprints, no footprints, no forced entry, The entire theory of abduction depended on a single voice. This dependency made her testimony both powerful and precarious. To supporters, she was the crucial eyewitness, the one person who glimpsed the abductor. To critics, she was the weakest link, an unreliable witness whose words created more questions than answers. In the absence of corroboration, her story became either the most important clue or the most dangerous distraction. As the hours turned into days, Jane Tanner's testimony became both the centerpiece and the problem of the investigation. For the Portuguese police, known as the Polícia Judiciária, her sighting was less a breakthrough than a riddle. Chief Inspector Gonçalo Amaral, leading the early inquiry, was deeply skeptical. He had handled violent crimes and trafficking cases in the Algarve long enough to know how easily narratives could be constructed to fit needs. To him, Tanner's words seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed, sliding into the gap between Jerry's 9:05 check and Kate's tedious discovery like a scripted act. The PJ's doubts were not just theoretical. They searched for physical evidence to support the idea of an abduction at 9:15, a forced shutter, a footprint in the garden, fingerprints on the window, but found nothing. The only fingerprints belonged to Kate McCann herself. No neighbors reported a stranger hurrying away with a child. No trace of disruption was left behind. To Amaral and his team, the absence of corroboration was damning. It was possible that Tanner had misinterpreted a harmless sight, perhaps another tourist carrying his own daughter. And indeed, months later, investigators identified a British holidaymaker who admitted doing exactly that around the same time. Meanwhile, across the channel, the British press embraced Tanner's account with fervor. Tabloids splashed her description across front pages: the dark figure, the barefoot child, the pale pajamas. For them, it was proof of abduction, a gripping image that fed headlines and fueled the narrative of a sinister intruder. The parents, already under immense scrutiny, pointed to Tanner's sighting as validation of their claim that Madeleine had been taken. It gave them an ally outside their own voices, someone independent to say, "I saw her being carried away." This divergence between police suspicion and media amplification created a chasm in the case. In Portugal, detectives questioned whether Tanner's testimony was reliable at all. In Britain, it became the anchor of public understanding. The result was an investigation pulled in two directions, one guided by skepticism and evidence, the other propelled by narrative and emotion. Tanner herself seemed caught in the middle. She was neither seeking the spotlight nor entirely avoiding it. Her testimony was repeated in press conferences, documentaries, and reconstructions, each time treated as both fact and question. To investigators, her words complicated more than they clarified. To the media, they were too powerful to let go. And so Jane Tanner became not just a witness, but a symbol of the fragility of memory, of the hunger for story, and of the way a single voice can overshadow the silence of evidence. While Jane Tanner's account dominated headlines, there was another testimony from that same night that told a very different story. Around 10 p.m., just as Kate McCann discovered her daughter missing, Martin Smith and several members of his family were returning to their apartment after an evening out. Near the church in Praia da Luz, they too saw a man carrying a small child. The similarities with Tanner's sighting were striking. The child was barefoot, dressed in pale sleepwear, and appeared to be about 4 years old. But unlike Tanner, the Smiths were not alone. Multiple members of the family saw the same figure, offering a collective observation rather than a solitary impression. The Smith family recalled details that gave their account a weight Tanner's lacked. They noticed the awkward way the man carried the child's limbs hanging loosely, and the direction in which he was heading. Months later, Martin Smith even admitted that the man's appearance reminded him of Jerry McCann himself, though he could not be absolutely certain. This suggestion, unsettling in its implications, placed the Smith sighting in direct conflict with the abduction narrative promoted by the McCanns and supported by Tanner's words. Yet, despite its corroboration by several witnesses, the Smith testimony was largely sidelined. It appeared in reports, but rarely with the same emphasis. The reason was simple. It did not fit the narrative that had already taken hold. British media, fiercely protective of the McCanns, leaned heavily on Tanner's account, which supported the image of an external predator. To highlight the Smith sighting too strongly would have risked casting suspicion back on the family, an angle the press seemed unwilling to explore. For investigators, the juxtaposition of these two sightings was troubling. On one side was a solitary voice that aligned conveniently with the parents' timeline. On the other, a family's collective memory that raised uncomfortable questions. Why then did one become the cornerstone of the case, while the other was quietly minimized? The answer reveals the power of narrative over evidence. Tanner's testimony fit the story the world wanted to believe: a child stolen by a stranger. The Smith sighting threatened that comfort, hinting at something darker, something closer to home. In the end, it was not just about what was seen that night, but about which vision the world was willing to accept. In the years since that night in May 2007, Jane Tanner's words have never stopped echoing. For some, she remains the fragile hope, the one person who witnessed Madeleine being carried away, the image that kept alive the belief she had been abducted and might still be found. For others, her testimony is the weakest link, a flawed or even fabricated account that misdirected the investigation and allowed a tragedy to be reframed as a crime. What cannot be denied is the influence of her statement. In the absence of hard evidence, no forced entry, no ransom demand, no trace left behind, her sighting became the scaffolding on which the case was built. It provided the missing link between Jerry's check at 9:05 and Kate's desperate discovery at 10, giving the narrative shape and sequence. But with that power came danger. If her testimony was mistaken, then the world has spent nearly 2 decades chasing a phantom. The lesson is stark. Memory is fragile, stories are malleable, and eyewitness testimony, however vivid, must never replace evidence. Yet, in the Madeleine McCann case, one woman's fleeting glimpse became more than memory. It became a symbol of the desperation to believe in abduction rather than accident, of the way media seizes on an image to sell a story, and of how a single voice can tilt the balance between guilt and innocence. Today, Jane Tanner's legacy is not only about what she saw, but about what her words created, a narrative that divided public opinion, shaped investigative priorities, and defined the world's understanding of one of the most haunting mysteries of our time. Whether she glimpsed the truth or unknowingly helped obscure it, her testimony remains the pivot on which the Madeleine McCann case still turns. And so, the question lingers, unresolved. Was Jane Tanner the unlucky witness of a crime unfolding before her eyes, or the unwitting narrator of a story that never happened? The answer may decide whether the world has been searching for Madeleine all these years in the wrong direction.